So for me, there's lots of things that I get to do outside of the law in my career that I wouldn't be able to do if I was practicing as a lawyer. Some of my favourite moments are, looking back on 20 years, I had a candidate who got to move from one side of Australia, the East Coast, to the West Coast in a remote community. And when I rang her the first time, she was like, please leave me alone, I don't want to move. And I was a little bit pushy. She ended up taking the job and she rang me up and said, this has just changed my life. So my background was I studied at the University of New South Wales and I got a summer clerkship with Baker & McKenzie. They sent me over to their Jakarta office. I spent some time there, which was great. And then I came back as a graduate with Baker & McKenzie in their Sydney office. And I worked in banking and finance for about 12 months. And then I did a rotation into intellectual property and IT law during the dot-com bubble. So really interesting times. But the longer I stayed, the more I realized that I didn't ultimately want to stay as a partner in a law firm. That's not, I saw my career trajectory. I liked people. I was the sort of guy that knew the names of the kids of the secretary floors up, but I wasn't passionate enough about the law to spend the rest of my life doing it. So I acknowledged that early. I waited to do 2 years, which I think everybody should do. And at the end of the 2 years, I resolved I wanted to do something else. I thought maybe going to the bar was an option. I had a friend who's now a judge, but was at the time a QC in Melbourne, who asked me to read with him. And I thought about it long and hard, but I didn't want to move to Melbourne with my family in Sydney. So at the end of the day, I decided to work with a friend of mine who just happened to be a recruiter. I loved it. She left the company after a few months of me being there, and I thought, you know what, I'm 27, you only get one shot. So I started my own business on my 27th birthday in May 2000, and we just celebrated our 20th anniversary recently. I got to tell you, there's nothing that gives me more of a buzz than making a placement. I still love it. And I got to tell you, when a candidate says no to a job offer, I still hate it. I feel every single one. And I know there are times where I'll get my P&L at the end of the year and you just see one number, but to me, every single deal that is made of that number is meaningful. And I think that the moment you don't get that joy for making a call telling somebody that they're getting a job, you should probably leave. So for me, I realized how many hours of your waking life are spent in a job, and I have the ability to alter that. Some of my favourite moments are, looking back on 20 years, I had a candidate who got to move from one side of Australia, the East Coast, to the West Coast in a remote community. And when I rang her the first time, she was like, please leave me alone, I don't want to move. And I was a little bit pushy. She ended up taking the job and she rang me up and said, this has just changed my life. I probably didn't appreciate it at the time, but but for you seeing what a good match it was and encouraging me to explore it, I would have never have done that. So, I get to change people's lives. So the Australian legal market can be divided into two. We can talk about probably until February this year and then post February, March once COVID hit. So beforehand, everything was going crazy. We were the busiest we ever had been. I had expanded from a 2-person team to a 7-person team because we were so busy. M&A, corporate, IPOs, employment, tax, everything you name it was busy, with probably the exception of insolvency and bankruptcy. And then the world changed when COVID hit. Now, the first 1 to 2 months, March, April, there was just uncertainty. So very few jobs were live. People were just like, wait and see. So everything sort of dropped off a cliff. And then what we found in Australia, because a combination of luck, maybe things like climate, maybe some good planning by the state and the federal governments, whatever it may be, we managed to escape very lightly. So until the end of June, we only had 200 deaths for a population of 26 million people. Cases were very rare. We'd get a dozen here, a dozen there. It was very, very light. So the economy picked up with the confidence and everything was on track. So we picked up a lot of energy. And then sadly, one of our states had an outbreak, which has been very vicious. In fact, over 59 people died today, which is the biggest day ever. And that economy is Victoria, which is our state, which is about 25% of the GDP. So the ramifications is that has hit confidence of businesses across the country. So we went from being on a bit of a J trajectory to, I think it's going to be more of a W. So the areas that are popular at the moment because of government intervention and also people worrying about redundancies, employment and workplace law is very busy. A lot of people are being locked down, so they're getting sick of their spouses. So family law is very busy. Litigation, very obviously, is busy, and obviously bankruptcy and insolvency law within that. And insurance seems to be quite busy as well. Property was quiet. It's starting to pick up in New South Wales and a little bit in Queensland. But M&A, IPOs, the big deal stuff is still a little bit quiet. I think they're still waiting to see. And people realizing looking to list now is probably not the optimum time. And I realized overnight, I think the Dow plummeted as well. So people are just watching the global economy and the deals aren't happening and confidence is not where it could be. But I'm absolutely bullish that things will pick up in the next few months if we can contain the prices. So the type of candidates are often the ones that have had stability. So people who've been with a job for 3 to 5 years and they've realised for various reasons that it's time to make a move. Maybe they're not going to get partnership because there's 2 people ahead of them, or maybe it's that they're just feeling that they're not appreciated in their current workplace, whatever it may be. So someone who's got stability on their CV, has worked at a good brand name firm, it could be a strong boutique, it could be a mid or a top tier, and somebody who's happy to understand that recruiters need to invest time in them. So someone who's just applying for random jobs and has seen maybe 5 or 6 recruiters is not going to get me very excited. Somebody who says, look, Jason, I understand you've been doing this for 20 years. You know all the players around town. I trust you to look after putting me in a place where I'm going to be happy. Just run with it and keep me in the loop. They're the ones that I think make me excited. It really is how long is a piece of string. You can't say everybody universally. So I think where you can divide it is sophisticated or unsophisticated and greenfields versus non-greenfields. So for example, a lot of our clients are multinationals. They would have a general counsel with a team of maybe half a dozen lawyers. He or she doesn't need much hand-holding. They know what they want. They've probably come from a big firm themselves and understand how it all works. And they'll say to us, we need X, Y, and Z. We'll probably have to liaise with the human resources people at some stage in the process, but they know what we want and what they want. And often they're very selective. So they don't just want somebody with relevant experience in terms of the law, they want somebody with relevant experience in terms of the industry. So if they're hiring for a telco who spent somebody who's looking at, for example, contracts all day long and maybe liability clauses, then even if that person has been doing contracts and liability clauses in FMCG, they're not going to look at them in the same way as they look for somebody with direct industry experience. So we don't do much of team moves. We've moved individual partners. They may bring along an associate, a secretary or a PA. So we don't have a lot of exposure to that area. But what I would say is the most important thing when you're bringing team across is the culture. So where you find things don't work, particularly in large scale mergers, is firm A has got particular values, firm B has different values, and then they end up being incompatible. And you'll often find people will then move or find it that they'll go out on their own or move somewhere else with more compatible values. And often you'll find with culture, if there's a larger firm subsuming a smaller firm, the dominant culture is that by the larger firm. And often you'll find that maybe the partner's on a good wicket and he or she's earning a lot more money, but maybe the associate that came along that was promised all these sunshine, rainbows and unicorns find it doesn't match his or her expectations. And often they will look at other things that may be better. And often they may have a clear path in the small firm, whereas if they join the bigger firm, they realise there are blockages and maybe more competition for professional development. This is what I call the sliding doors question. So last year I went to Hong Kong as part of a round the world trip with my family, and the stop before Hong Kong was London. In London, I met with my best friend from Baker & McKenzie days, who married another lawyer who also worked with us. They both live in London. So I got to see his life as a lawyer versus my life as a recruiter. And there's no doubt financially they've done a lot better than I ever have. He drives a Porsche, I drive a Toyota. But I think it's very much a matter of one's personal preferences. So for me, I don't think I would have been happy getting up every Monday morning going to practice law for the last 20 years. Whereas I still enjoy what I do now. I still enjoy every placement. I have a team. I look after my team. I have meetings with them and I enjoy coaching and training them. I do some lecturing. So every lawyer that wants to become a partner has to do a course in New South Wales. I teach one of those courses and I do a lot of volunteer activities. So I'm part of a global network of 550 recruitment companies called NPA Worldwide, and I'm the current chairman. I get involved in the peak industry body, the RCSA, and I was lucky enough to win their award for Recruitment Leader of the Year recently. So for me, there's lots of things that I get to do outside of the law in my career that I wouldn't be able to do if I was practicing as a lawyer. And most importantly, I have a family. I have 3 children and a dog, who's probably the most important, and a lovely wife. And I get to spend a lot more time with them because I do a career where I can manage my hours than what I could do if I was sitting there waiting for a partner to let me go home because he needed to sign off on something or she needed to sign off on something. So at the end of the day, material things are not the only thing. You have to have a love for what you do. And I clearly love what I do after 20 years. And I don't regret it. But if my friend decided to give me a Porsche anyway, I wouldn't say no.